chosen Klein's Heating and Air Conditioning. It's owned by Michael and Treasure Boston, the company that works so diligently to meet all the needs of our HVAC system. Not only did they go above and beyond, but they also brought on 3 additional partners, Active Pure, Ferguson, and Carrier, to support the replacement of all 8 HVAC units. We also want to give a heartfelt thank you to Avista, who came in with the energy rebates and grants to eliminate the shortfall. A special thank you again to Haley Gunther and her help, Haley Spot, which helped shed a light to our needs here at Corbin. We also want to thank everybody that's already donated. We are still accepting donations, mainly to pay our part that we need to pay, but also once it's all paid, we need to maintain it, and that is with filters that we have to change and everything. So anything that is donated for the furnace, that's all it goes for. It's in a special little place in an account, and it all goes for the furnace. So again, I thank you, and any donations are welcome.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the warmth that we see every time, don't we? It's my pleasure now, as program chair for only 2 more times, to introduce our next speaker for November. It's my pleasure to introduce you to Dave Benscoter, who grew up in Pullman, Washington, and he graduated from WSU. Go Cougs. Now, if you look at a guy that eats an apple a day to keep the doctor away, would you ever guess that he spent 24 years in the FBI and then with the IRS? Because this is a guy that knows how to stay healthy, right? He worked in Seattle, North Carolina, Chicago, and Spokane, and following his retirement, he stumbled upon the fact that apples, believed to be extinct in our area, were actually here and there wild in old fields and orchards. And he started to study that. And they started growing in eastern Washington as early as the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And so he has taken this on as his quest, and it's led him to this personal search for lost apples and the creation of the Lost Apple Project, which has gotten tons of national interest, as well as the book that he's gone on to write. I first talked to him, this is the first time we got to meet, but we've been talking for almost 10 years about 2 lost apple trees we have up by the Canadian border. Every year I call him and say, now how many apples do you need? I haven't been able to do it yet because the bears and the elk eat them before I can give them to him. But now, if you have an apple tree, he has a new deal where you can give him apple leaves from your tree, and it's a little DNA cost, and he can actually now do the DNA of your apples, which is pretty darn cool. So we're on the list next. But with that, I'd like to introduce you to someone who's taken an apple a day and made it his life's quest, Dave Benscoter.
Thank you very much for the camera here. I'm going to go over here and tell you, I did bring books if you want to purchase them. It's called Lost Apples, and it details the history of apple growing in the United States. It also, and I'll be speaking about that during our presentation here. Right up to the present, where currently we have 30 apples that we have rediscovered. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them up here today. And I've got also business cards. If you think you might know of an old tree, please take a business card, and next fall send me an email. And that is exactly how we find these old trees, is people let us know where they're located, and we go out, pick the trees, and send them to apple identification experts. Hold it close up here. Okay, thank you. I'm not sure why, but this computer is putting a circle on some of these, but it seems to be hidden in most of them, so we'll see here. Okay. The way I got started in this was back in about 2013. I have a neighbor. She met her through church. She is a disabled missionary, and I would go over and do chores for her, and she lives in a house that where her grandparents live. The property is out in Chattaroy, and that orchard is about 300 yards from the house. And one day I was over there in the fall, probably 2013, and she asked if I could go pick her some apples, and I said, sure. So I grabbed a bucket, grabbed a ladder, headed over to the orchard, and came back in about 10 minutes, and I said, I cannot pick a single apple from that orchard. It hadn't been pruned in years, or if at all. And I said, I do know how to prune apple trees. My dad had taught me. So I said, I'll come back in February, March, when the trees are dormant, and I can prune your trees for you. And within about 2 or 3 years, you're going to have a crop of apples. And so that winter, I was kind of thinking about that, and I thought, you know, those apples trees are not going to be any that I'm aware of, being from 1915. And so I called her up and I said, do you know what apple varieties are in that orchard? And she said, well, I remember the top row. And she said, those are yellow transparent. And if you're not familiar with yellow transparent, that's the earliest apple that ripens in the summer in late July in the Spokane area. And then she called her brother, and her brother recalled that the next row of apples were wealthy. That was actually a pretty significant apple in American history. It was the first bred apple in the United States. It fell out of Minnesota. Bred the apple because he could not find apples that would ripen in northern Minnesota. The trees would die because it was so cold there. So he wanted to, and he was able to come up with the wealthy apple. It's a wonderful apple. She didn't know any of the others. So I spent that winter, I did a terrible thing. I got on the internet. And that was so addicting. The first thing I found was, if you notice, the Arcadia orchards. There was a lot about Arcadia orchards up in Deer Park. I won't go into that because that really doesn't have much to do with finding lost apples. But it did pique my interest in old apples and kind of opened my eyes to apple growing in eastern Washington. Everybody knows about, everybody knows Washington is the #1 producer of apples in the United States. But eastern Washington was a huge producer of apples in the late 1800s, early 1900s. I want to explain a little bit how apple trees become apple trees. Everybody knows we're in wheat country. If you plant a wheat seed out in the field, it's going to produce some wheat. But apples are not like that. Apples are closer to people. So let's see, a little birds and bees explanation. So if you've got a yellow delicious in your orchard and your neighbor has a Honeycrisp seed, or excuse me, a Honeycrisp tree, and a bee lands on the Honeycrisp and comes over and pollinates your Gold Delicious, those blossoms, every single blossom have a unique DNA from every other apple in the world. And the result of that is that if you plant, let's say you took 100 apple seeds and just planted them in the ground, you have no idea what's going to come up. Now, if you go on eBay, you might find Honeycrisp apple seeds for sale. And if you spent your $10 on those seeds, they're absolutely worthless because they're not going to produce Honeycrisp trees. But every seed in one of those apples on the Yellow Delicious is going to be unique. Most of them are going to taste terrible. I call them spitters. You just want to spit them out as quickly as you can. But that gives you a little basis of what I'm going to go into next. Okay, so Pilgrims arrived in America around 1620. They had a custom in Europe. I think London is probably the best example, where it's a big city. You can't drink the water out of the river in London because all the sewage ran into the river. If the plague was going through Europe about every 20 or 30 years, people didn't understand, where the plague came from. They didn't understand bacteria, but they did know that if you drank hard cider, you didn't get sick. And so in Europe, in the 1600s, 1700s, 1500s, the making of hard cider was serious business. Everybody drank hard cider. Even children drank a watered-down version of hard cider. And the reason for that is if you drank hard cider, you didn't get sick. This is the whole drawing of hard cider. As I started getting into the apples in the Spokane area, I started collecting books, reading books. This is Old Southern Apples by Lee Calhoun. Lee passed away in 2020, but I knew him before that. And he was a wonderful guy, wonderful book. The first half of the book is about old Southern apples that still exist today. The second half of the book is old Southern apples that are believed to be extinct. And Lee was an apple hunter, basically what I am now. And he found many lost apples. That was the first time I was introduced to there being lost apples. And I'm going to throw out a figure that is going to sound a little bit crazy, but there are 17,000 named varieties of apples in the United States. And of those 17,000, about 13,000 are considered lost. Okay, you see the east coast of the United States. This is where all the apple detectives, apple hunters before me have been from. John Bunker up in Maine, Carlos Manning in West Virginia, Tom Burford in Virginia, Lee Calhoun and Tom Brown both in North Carolina. I did not know why there were no other apple hunters outside the East Coast. I just figured, well, it probably can't be done, or somebody would have done it. Just to give you an idea, okay, so after the Revolutionary War, England had a treaty with all the Indian tribes. So basically they promised the Indian tribe, we're not going to go any farther than the coast. We're just, in all the coast states, we're going to stay there. Well, after the Revolutionary War, there was no treaty, so people started moving into Ohio and Pennsylvania and pushing into Arkansas. We acquired the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. We had treaties to get the Spanish territory in the Northwest. And finally, the Lewis and Clark expedition ended in 1806, finding a way to the Northwest. And in 1840, that was the beginning of the Oregon Trail. You see it goes through, pretty close to us, goes through basically the Walla Walla area and the Whitman Mission near Walla Walla. This is Marcus Whitman. Marcus came to the Northwest in 1836. He and a fellow missionary by the name of Spalding came out, and Spalding went to Lapway, and Marcus Whitman went to the Whitman Mission, which is near Walla Walla. And this is how everybody came out on the Oregon Trail. Everybody came in these wagons. And in 1847, so that's just 7 years after the Oregon Trail opened, Henderson Llewellyn came out on the Oregon Trail. And Henderson was unique. He was the first nurseryman to come out to the Northwest. This was unusual because all the times previous to that, I have to back up a little bit. I mentioned how important hard cider was to people in England, France, and all the European countries. People could drink hard cider and they knew they wouldn't get sick. When they arrived in the United States, we had crystal clear streams. We had crystal clear rivers. But the immigrants also brought their customs. And the custom they brought was apple drinking hard cider. So when they reached America, they took millions of apple seeds with them and put them in the ground. And hard cider can be made of just absolutely the worst tasting apple you can imagine. And if they're combined with other apples, it makes a wonderful hard cider. So up and down the East Coast, there were, everyone would plant seeds to make hard cider. Now, everybody knows about that Johnny the Appleseed. Johnny actually was a real person. He lived in the late 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, and he would go to cider mills. Cider mills were still active in the late 1700s, early 1800s, who would get apple seeds, go plant them, and then he'd later either sell the trees that were produced, or he would give them away. I mentioned that apple seeds usually don't produce very good trees, but if you were, let's say you were a colonist in Maine, and you planted 100 apple seeds, it was more likely probably 500, but if you had 100 apple seeds, and maybe one of those trees or two of those trees produced good tasting apples, you would take it to your neighbor, and you'd say, hey, taste this apple, and see what you think of it. And he'd say, wow, that's a really good apple, because they're used to apples being pretty bad, you know, from seeds going in the ground. The apples don't taste very good, but this apple tastes good. Well, that's great. I'll graft it next spring. And he would say, well, we need to have a name for it. Well, maybe the fellow that gave him the apple was Doc Brown. We'll call that apple Doc Brown. Or maybe it was grown near a chimney. We'll call that the chimney apple. But with all these millions of apple seeds going into the ground for hard cider orchards, eventually 1, 2, 3 started going from person to person, and eventually there's 17,000 named apple varieties in the United States and Canada. Anderson Llewellyn was a nurseryman, and when he came out west, the temperance movement had already started, and when he came out west, he brought with him nursery stock. And when he came, he went to Walla Walla. He went through Walla Walla, and he met Marcus Whitman and his family. But just a few months after he visited Marcus Whitman, the Whitmans and another family were killed at the mission. The Native Americans thought they had brought disease with them. A lot of white settlers and Native Americans were killed. But what the Army did was they shut down homesteading. They shut down people living in eastern Washington, northern Idaho, eastern Oregon. They said, this place is not safe. We have got to make this safe before we let settlers in. So in 1856, Walla Walla built a fort. By 1858, the Army came out and said, you know what, it's fine now. You can go back and start homesteading. And one of the first settlers who came to the Walla Walla area was Ransom Clark, and he began a nursery by 1859. So the year after it opens up, he brings a nursery. And his wife was Lettice Clark. Ransom came out to Walla Walla. He started building a cabin. He brought his 13-year-old son with him. They started building this cabin, and then a man came over and he said, I'll help your son build a cabin. And because Ransom Clark wanted to go back and get his wife in Portland, Lettice. They also had another child and one on the way. So Ransom went back to Portland. His son and this man built the cabin, and on the way back to Portland, it's believed that Ransom got pneumonia. He arrived in Portland and died a short time later. Well, Lettice's family said, well, certainly you're not going to go to Walla Walla now. Ransom, your husband's not here. You'll just have to bring all your children and live here in Portland with us. She said, no, Ransom told me that this was a wonderful place. I want to go check it out. So she got on a steamboat, went up the Columbia River, got on a stagecoach, went to Walla Walla, informed her son that his dad was dead. Then she checked that out. The cabin was there. She thought that they could make a go of it, so she went back to Portland, had her baby, and then goes back to Walla Walla, starts this nursery. And Lettice, there is the cabin. It's a photograph of the cabin. And Lettice is really honored in Walla Walla. There have been wines that have been named after her. There was a play that they did about Lettice. She is a huge historical figure in Walla Walla. That's the cabin right there. I believe it's on one side is the kitchen and the other side is where they slept. And that's a picture of me. I've actually been transported in time. This is on the grounds of the Fort Walla Walla Museum. Very cool. Okay, there you see Walla Walla down there. So as the homesteaders came out here, there were people who wanted to publish information, so the homesteaders would get it right, right off the blocks. This was a homestead pamphlet that was made in Nebraska, and in this pamphlet they had two experts describe how many apple trees a family should plant, and also how many of each tree. If you notice in the very bottom line, it said you should plant 100 apple trees for a family. That's a lot of apple trees. And anyway, it gives the specifics of it. Both of the fellows who were experts said 100 apple trees are how many you need to plant. This is a homestead down in Whitman County. You see the bluffs behind the homestead there. That's the Palouse River at the base of those bluffs. This is obviously an extremely wealthy family. You can tell by the barn and all that. Okay, so the uses of apples for these homesteaders. The apple was the most important fruit that they could plant because it was used so many different ways. You could eat it fresh, starting in July and ending in May. If you had I'll give you an example. Ben Davis was one of the most popular apples for the homesteaders. Ben Davis, you would take off the tree at the end of October, and you could put that in your cellar, and the next April and maybe even May, you could go down to your cellar, get a fresh Ben Davis, and it would still be good to eat. You can't say that about any other fruit. You can't get fresh fruit in May or April. You could also bake them, you can fry them, you can stew them, you can can them, you can dry them. A lot of dried apples, because over the winter they couldn't grow them over the winter, so drying was very important. So you could sauce them. Hard cider, apple cider vinegar, that was super important because they could preserve other foods with apple cider vinegar. And then apple butter. Okay, so these homesteaders were out, they weren't close to a store, especially before the trains came. The railroads came in 1883 to Eastern Washington. Before that, everything had to be brought up either on the Oregon Trail or on a boat going around South America. So you're not going to go down to your general store and you're not going to buy sugar. So they made apple butter. And what apple butter is, you take a whole bunch of apples, you put them in a big cauldron, you fill that cauldron with water, and you just start boiling. And you boil it, and you boil it. And by the time you get done and the water's off, there's a glaze at the bottom of your pot. And that glaze is just sugary apple. And that they could sweeten and use it to sweeten other foods. And finally, disease fruit you can feed to the animals. Philip Ritz, he was the next nurseryman in Walla Walla, came in 1861. His name is Ritz. You might know of a town that's located close to us called Ritzville. And it's named after Philip Ritz. After he opened the second nursery in Walla Walla, he later arranged for the railroad to go through what is now Ritzville. And he named the town after himself. That's a reproduction of his first catalog in 1863. This one came out 30 years later in 1893. But it was great because it told what apple trees he sold in 1863. This I got from Washington State University. It's also a catalog for the Ritz Nursery. This one was 1879. And I'm not showing you all the individual apples, but there were lost apples that were sold at the Ritz Nursery. There's an advertisement that went into the Whitman County Gazette. I think it was actually the Colfax Gazette when it first came out. Okay, I don't know where that was. Okay, Theophilus Smith. He was the first nurseryman in Colfax. Colfax became a town in 1872, and Theophilus Smith came in 1872. There is an ad that also ran in the first edition of the Colfax Gazette. This is downtown Colfax right there in black there. If you look up into the right there, there's a square, and that's Theophilus Smith's homestead. And I've been there, and he does have apples. There are a couple apple trees, but they are not lost apples as far as we know. Okay, this is a flyer that Theophilus Smith had for his Pleasant Dale fruit farm. And the little red boxes there are, it says Walbridge in one and Islam Sweet in the other one. It's actually a misspelling, should be Isham Sweet, but those are both lost apples. George Rudy was the third nurseryman in Colfax. This is the only list of apple trees I was able to find. Just a short ad in the Colfax Gazette, but there's a lot of information on George Rudy. From the Colfax Gazette, there were articles written about him in the Spokesman Review, and there's a picture of George Rudy. If you guys happen to see him, let me know. There's another ad that George Rudy ran. Okay, this is the Hanford Castle. This is sits on a hill just outside Oakdale. It's named for Edwin Hanford, the fellow that came out from Chicago and built this home. He was wealthy. He came out and he looked at Oakdale and he said, "This is going to be the next Spokane." And he was wrong. But he built this house. Took it like 3 years to build it. I think he came out in 1888. And he had the house built. I've been inside the house. It's amazing. It's 8,000 square feet. In the attic, you can play basketball. There's a servant's staircase in the middle of the house, about this wide. And anyway, it's very cool. It was used as a bed and breakfast for a while in the early 2000s. But Hanford started a nursery, and he also started an orchard. And I was fortunate because I was able to meet one of Mr. Hanford. Actually, I've met several of Mr. Hanford's relatives. Several of them still live in Oakdale. Some others are on the coast. But there is a Hanford nursery catalog from 1902, and all those boxed names are considered lost apples. And then the lowest box, the big box, says that these are the best apples from the 145 apples that the nursery carried. However, I don't think I have a slide up there. I later was given a letters book by one of the relatives, and the letters book also was a kind of receipt book for Mr. Hanford. And in that, I was able to find over 200 varieties of apples that Hanford had available at the Hanford Nursery. This is a stereoscope from Mr. Hanford while he was tending to what they call his seedling orchard. So I mentioned earlier that if you put an apple seed in the ground, it probably is not going to produce an apple that you're going to like. So Mr. Hanford liked to tell people, and I think he was probably accurate, that he was one of the few nursery owners who actually planted their own rootstock. Because all of the trees back then had to be grafted. As a matter of fact, all trees today have to be grafted. If you go to Home Depot and you get a Honeycrisp tree, that's actually on the rootstock of something else. A small tree is an apple tree, but if you put a seed in the ground, it'll grow to 30, 40 feet high. If you get a semi-dwarf or a dwarfing rootstock, those trees can be as short as 8 feet tall. I think most people probably get a semi-dwarf in the 15 to 20 foot high. But Hanford grew his own seedlings and then grafted known apple varieties to those seedlings. This is a catalog that came out in 1912 from the Vinland Nursery Company of Clarkston, Washington. So Edwin Hanford sold the nursery in 1907, Hanford Nursery in Oakdale, to the Vinland Nursery in Clarkston. Vinland promised to keep the Oakdale Nursery, also have a nursery in Clarkston, and open one in the Spokane Valley. I've never seen any evidence that the Spokane Valley was ever opened, and I think the Oakdale one was closed pretty soon after it was purchased also. So So I was really thrilled to see this catalog available online. And the reason I was excited to see that is that now I would finally know what was carried at the Hanford Nursery. So as I poured through the varieties, there's really no way to tell if the Hanford had the exact same inventory as the Vinland Nursery. But as I got to looking on this, let's see, go here. As I got to looking for where my little arrow is, it says the John apple. Well, I happen to know a little bit of history about the John apple. The John apple was an apple that a fellow came to the Hanford Nursery. He said to Mr. Hanford, hey, try this apple. Maybe he planted a seed, or maybe he threw out an apple and a seed sprouted up, and he went out to it and picked it, and it was a really good tasting apple. So he took it to Mr. Hanford and he said, what do you think of this apple? And Hanford said, I like it. It's a very good apple. It says up here that it resembles the Duchess of Oldenburg when ripe, shape and color, but it's later in the season. Duchess is ripe around September 1st. This one is an October apple. But what that told me is, okay, Vinland is keeping the same inventory as the Hanford Nursery. Okay, there's the letters book I mentioned. This is a page from the letters book. I did a presentation down in Pullman years ago, and a fellow came up to me after my presentation, and I was explaining how we were looking for this orchard. This says Mr. William Smith of Troy, Idaho, purchased all these apple trees, and 3 of them happened to be lost apples. Early Colton, the enormous Kitten, and Isham Sweet. And this fellow came and said, I'm from Troy. He said, do you need any work done? I said, absolutely, if you want to. And I told him what to do. You go to the county, you get a plat map, hopefully sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s. See if you can find Mr. William Smith's property. And if you do, contact the owner, see if there are old apple trees on the project. He did, and yes, there were apple trees on that property. They have not turned out to be lost varieties, but that's some of the work we do on the Lost Apple project. There's the back of the Hanford house. You can see that there's a bunch of trees planted there. Down in the Palouse, they're rolling hills, but sometimes those rolling hills have really sharp, they kind of fall away, and farm equipment can't go on those really steep areas. So what people would do is they put green belts behind their house. And this is what is behind the Hanford house today. There are pine trees, you can see that, but there are still apple trees. There's still pear trees, plum trees. None of them have turned out to be lost apples, but we're continuing. Yes? Okay, very good. Okay. The next thing I did was I happened to find a newspaper article that had the fair results from the Whitman County Fair in the early 1900s. And as I was looking, I realized that these 2 fellows submitted apples to the county fair that were lost apples. Fred Huffman, in the very bottom, he submitted 2 lost apples, the Lankford and the Walbridge. C.F. Hornby above, he submitted the Babbitt. So I went out, I found the C.F. Hornby property, and I went to it, and he carried, he was actually written about it in the Spokesman Review. He carried 50 varieties of apples in his orchard. Fred Huffman, he was the fellow that was the only fellow who submitted 2 lost varieties to the fair. I found a relative of Mr. Huffman down in Whitman County. He hopped into my pickup. He was 77 years old. He'd had a heart transplant 2 years earlier, and he died a couple years after I met him. But we went out on a road west of Steptoe, Washington, went out about 2 miles, and all of a sudden, Mr. Huffman said, stop the pickup. And he pointed to the top of a hill about 3/4 of a mile away, and he said, that's the Huffman homestead. So I got permission to go from the farmer who had wheat fields around the Huffman homestead, got permission, and Oh, okay. I thought I had a picture of the Huffman homestead. I actually went to that property. The homestead was still standing. The roof was half caved in. I'm sure raccoons and all sorts of critters were living in this homestead. And there was about an acre still that was not cultivated. There's still plums there. There's still cherry trees there. There's still apple trees there. We have not identified any lost varieties. Okay, so I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the first lost apple, and then I'll stop and we'll go on and you can ask questions. The first apple that I found was the fall genitine. And I actually I contacted some apple identification experts out of Portland. They were with the Home Orchard Society at the time. And they would go from town to town in the fall, every county fair, state fair, harvest festival. They'd set up a little table and they put their old books from the 1800s, early 1900s on their table, and people knew they were going to come every year and try to identify apples for them. So people would bring them apples every year from they'd found, and they would try to identify them. Well, I knew about those people. I contacted them. I said, you know, I'd kind of like to give this a try. The Walbridge, that was the red apple just before this slide. The Walbridge sounds like it might be easy to find because, well, I shouldn't say easy to find, because it was submitted the most times of any lost apple to the Colfax or the county fair in Whitman County. There were 6 different people that submitted the Walbridge as I went back and looked at the county fair records. And so I looked all around Colfax, I looked out in Whitman County, found three or four apple trees that appeared to look like the Walbridge. I'd just be driving down a road, I'd see an old apple, I'd stop, knock on the door, say, can I pick some apple trees? And they'd say, or apples from your trees? They'd say, yeah. I never was turned down. I got 3 or 4 bags of apples. I was ready to send those off to the experts. And then I was driving past a water pump station in Colfax. And hanging over the water pump station was this apple. And it was the weirdest apple I'd ever seen. It had these ridges, it almost looked like corners. I thought, that's so bizarre. And I sent that bag in, and very soon the experts got back to me. They said, well, you know, those 3 to 4 bags you sent us that might have been the Walbridge, they weren't the Walbridge. They said, this is the fall genitine. And I said, what's a fall genitine? And I started looking around, and nobody else had it. And that is a watercolor picture of the fall genitine. In 1880, the U.S. Department of Agriculture started to contract with watercolor artists to paint fruits and nuts. And if you think back, okay, there was no such thing as color photography at the time. These have been invaluable in finding lost apples. And there are approximately 4,000 pictures on, you can jump online. It's, you put USDA, watercolors, pomological, or watercolor apples, anything like that will get you the website. Okay. Dick?
Okay. Now question time. There's one back there, Donna.
Okay.
Me first?
Yes.
Okay. Dave, what are the chances that the names have changed? I mean, maybe the Wahlburger was called then now, and maybe now it's Red Delicious.
Great question. Actually, Walbridge does have another name. And the reason that I also picked the Walbridge as one to go for because its other name was Edgar Redstreak. So it's an apple that's red, but it has maroon stripes on it. And so that makes it, you know, kind of distinguished from other red apples. I thought that might be easier to locate, plus it was, yeah, it's possible that we could misidentify an apple, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we have kind of been in a partnership with Washington State University. Washington State University has a DNA catalog of apple DNA. We've got all the modern varieties, of course, and then many, many of the heritage varieties. They've got over, I think they've got over 3,000 apple profiles in their DNA database. So if I send an apple in, and I can't identify apples. I'm absolutely horrible at trying to identify apples. So I have to send them in. But if we send an apple in and the experts say, we are kind of thinking it might be this blank fall genetic. Well, now what our last step is we take a leaf from the tree, we send it to Washington State University, have them run it and make sure that that DNA does not come back to another apple. And that has happened, and we've had to adjust our list. But it's a great tool to use. It also tells us who the parents are of the apple. So, and that's been helpful because there have been instances where I'll go and take an apple and I'll send it in, great tasting apple, and they'll say, yeah, it could be this lost variety. And then I've sent the DNA test in and it'll come back and the parents were red delicious and yellow delicious. Well, I immediately know that it can't be a lost variety because red delicious was not introduced until 1895, yellow delicious until 1915. So I know immediately I can not look at that apple anymore and just go on and do other work. Molly?
A little bit related, but so if an apple is lost and then you bring in something that you find, how can they match it, the DNA, to something that they don't have DNA
Yeah,
for?
they can't. And so what we're basically doing, if they think we found a lost variety, we send it in to make sure that its DNA is not in the database. If it is in the database, we'll know the name of the apple. But if it's not in there, it's going to be it'll come back as unique. It's never been sent in before, and now we go with what the experts say it is.
And that brings up a question I thought. You're next. If there's 17,000 apples out there, and you pick an apple, how do you know if this was lost?
I don't. I can't identify an apple. But an apple has up to 50 different characteristics. Everything from the length of the stem to the shape of the seed, all things that are way above my pay grade. You'll even notice, here's an apple here, and this is the fall genetic, by the way. Yeah, and fall genetic has a super short stem. It's clear down, it doesn't even pop out. Here's the streak pippin, its stem is a little bit longer. I would say that's medium. And then, of course, there's some apples that have long stems, but that's just one of 50 different characteristics.
Where can you buy these beautiful apples?
The only place that grows these right now is Story Orchards in Potlatch. And he used to grow them and sell them at the Moscow farmers market in the fall. I do not know if he still does, but that's other than that, you have to grow them yourself. Yes.
If the seeds don't breed pure, true, and how do you preserve these trees?
Oh, very good. Yes, what we have to do is we have to go out, so over the winter, these apple identification experts take the apples, we do, they decide which ones they believe might be lost varieties. If we have to send it in for DNA testing, that's going to have to wait till the spring, till leaves come out, and we can send those in. But what we can do before that is we can go back to the tree in February or March and get grafting wood. And just the same way that Honeycrisp and all the other popular apples today are sold at nurseries, they're all done with grafting. And so we take the grafting wood, we take rootstock, and we graft it on there. And we offer trees for sale. Usually on January 1st, we come out with on Facebook, we have a Lost Apple Project Facebook page. We announce that people can send in orders for either grafting wood or trees. They have to pick up their trees in eastern Washington, but we do mail scion wood, grafting wood all over the United States. Yes?
In the early 1900s, how many different types of apples do you think were in this area that are the older or potentially lost?
Well, so Hanford had over 200 varieties. I've got records from WSU. They had about 500 apple varieties there. And I mentioned George Rudy, a nursery owner in Colfax. He was working with the agriculture professor at WSU. They were testing Hungarian varieties. We found one of the apples is Mialafi right here. This is a Hungarian apple. And we found it about 7 miles southeast of Pullman, and which is very close to Washington State University, which is right where they were testing these Hungarian apples. And if you want to come up and take a look at the apples, these are all apples that we have recovered. Yes?
So I'm wondering what to do. I mean, where I grew up outside of Lake Tahoe, there in our backyard was a huge orchard. But also in front of our house, there were 2 apple trees there, a kind of apple I've never seen before or since. And so I'm wondering if I go down and talk to the landowner, I go down and harvest 1 or 2 of these, what do I do from there to get it identified?
Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to come up here and get my business card.
Okay.
You're going to take it home. And next fall, you're going to go to your neighbor and you're going to say, hey, can I have 7 or 8 apples from this tree?
Okay.
And then you're going to email me, and I'm probably going to drive through Lake Tahoe next fall, and I'll pick up the apples from you. We've got to have owner permission, and then the most important thing is that they taste good. Because the homesteaders, these settlers, did not plant poor tasting apples. They wanted apples that they could eat. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, along the same lines, all through the Palouse, where the railroad lines used to be, all along there, there's fruit trees, and particularly crab apples. Do you do anything about crab apples?
We don't do anything about crab apples, but when the first immigrants came from Europe, there were no apple trees in North America other than crab apples. So every one of these apples originally came from a seed that came from Europe. So yeah, there were no apple trees. And however, the railroad lines, county roads, things like that, you'll see apple trees along. We pretty much discount those trees because I've got pictures of railroad crews building these railroad tracks in the late 1800s, and there might be 30, 40 guys there. Everybody brought their lunch with them, and an apple was going to be, part of their lunch. And so they discarded the apple, and then later on, when the railroads came in, people weren't taking the stagecoach, let's say from Pullman to Spokane anymore. They were getting on a railroad. They were coming to Spokane, and they could toss an apple out the window too. So, but if you find a really good tasting one, which is going to be hard to find, let me know.
Okay, we're about out of time, so let's see. Another night.
All right, thank you so much. I've got books here for sale for $38 if you want them. There, so, and take a look at the apples, and also grab my business card if you think you might have a lost, or excuse me, you might have an old apple where you live and it's unidentified. Thank you.
And stay right here, David. We also like to honor our speakers. If you're a member of the club, you become part of a very elite group that has done a speech here, a presentation, and you get an old Joe pin for doing that as a part of the. It's moving. Okay, so I'm wearing an old Joe pin. But if you're not a member, we're giving you a couple of the old Pacific Northwestern previous editions. And tonight, I grabbed 2 that I just thought might be interesting to you. One is Seth Woodward, the pioneer from Millwood. And the other one is called, and this is from 1983, The Mating Practices of Early Protestant Missionaries. It is a mouthful, I can't say it. So Dave, we want to say thank you for being here tonight and share some vast amount of information. It's really interesting. And the next